Hello and welcome to American Music, where we live our stories through the shared experiences of musical artists, storytellers, and documentarians. My name is Randall Keith Horton. I'm your host, and today's guest is Professor Jeffrey Taylor. And welcome to the show, Jeffrey.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, really,
very happy to be here.
Really glad to have you. Professor Taylor is the director of the H. Wiley Hitchcock Institute for Studies in American Music.
You got it.
Yeah, and I have known about the Institute for decades, and I know of its importance, and I believe that our audience needs to know about the importance of the Institute. Jeffrey Taylor is professor and director of the H. Wiley Hitchcock Institute for Studies in American Music, the internationally recognized center for the study and presentation of American music based at the Conservatory of Music, Brooklyn College, CUNY, City University of New York, where he specializes in jazz and other areas of music in the United States as a professor and teaches general courses in Western music history and musicology. He is also on the faculty of the CUNY Graduate Center, where he teaches doctoral seminars in American music and jazz history and historiography. His scholarly work has focused primarily on pre-1940s jazz, and his research includes many aspects of current trends in jazz and popular music scholarship and performance, particularly those related to race, gender, class, sexuality, and spirituality. His writing has appeared in the Musical Quarterly, Black Music Research Journal, American Music Review, the ISAM newsletter from the Institute for Studies in American Music, and other publications. As a performer, Taylor has focused primarily on the work of early jazz pianists, such as Jelly Roll Morton, Fats Waller, James P. Johnson, and George Gershwin. What is the Institute, and specifically, how and why did it begin?
Okay, it's an interesting story. It actually, its founding goes back to 1971. H. Wiley Hitchcock, who was one of the premier historians of American music, musicologist,
Yes.
proposed this foundation with the then provost, and they had this idea for this venture, and they put it together. And so in 1971, they announced that he was opening the doors of this great facility here. And at the time, there was very little in the way of research centers or really sources to study American music. And there was actually not a lot of interest.
Yes, yeah.
But when they opened the Institute, they thought they were the very first.
Yes.
And
at
turns
that time,
out,
pardon me?
No.
At that time, it was the Institute for Studies in American Music.
That's right. Yeah, and Hitchcock was a director. He was a director until he retired from CUNY in '93, and then Carol Oja took it over. She was one of his students at the Graduate Center, and she's now at Harvard. And when she moved on, Ellie Hassama, who's now at Columbia, was with us for many years, and then I came on after Ellie left.
Yes.
So,
well, you have made me aware that Professor Hitchcock thought that the Institute for Studies in American Music, which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is based in New York City at Brooklyn College, CUNY, he thought that it was the first institute of its kind. And we'll talk in a minute about why it was formed. We'll put it this way. We'll say a bit more about it, the reason why it was formed, especially from the point of view of, I won't say disrespect, but the lack of attention from musicologists and others who would consider American music if they thought it was worthy of their consideration. But then after that, of course, he came along, and his immediate predecessors, and the subject just blossomed, and now we have this great resource for the studies of our own history. As a matter of fact, that's why this show exists, because of the research of people like Dr. Hitchcock and Sister Mary Dominic, which you were going to tell us about in just a second. Could you give us a sense of what the beginnings or other institutions?
It's interesting because
Yeah.
what you say is absolutely right. And it seems kind of hard to believe now, but there was very little scholarly interest in American music up to this point. My advisor, my teacher at the University of Michigan, Richard Crawford, who was a student of Wiley Hitchcock, describes one of the very first meetings of a special interest group in American music at the American Musicological Society.
Exactly.
And it's very interesting because he says, we met in the bowels of this library. He phrases it as something like a convention of wallflowers or something like that. You know, typical typical Crawford
humor.
About, you know, these people, you know, sort of outcasts from the society talking about music that nobody cared about.
Right. This is American music that nobody cares about. Scholars don't care about it.
But I'm listening.
Yeah.
There were some very important things that happened around this time. The Institute came along, and then the foundation of the Sonic Society for American Music. That's S-O-N-N-E-C-K, not S-O-N-I-C.
I see. Never thought about that way. I-S-E-E. Excuse me.
Right.
Never thought about it that way.
So it's currently, we changed our name a few years ago to the Society for American Music.
Yes, from the Sonic Society.
Right.
Yes.
And, but it's named after Oscar Sonic, who was the first music librarian at the Library of Congress. And wrote some of the very earliest bibliographies of American music. And, you know, of course, the Library of Congress music collection has become a huge resource for the study of American music.
Yeah.
So it was named after him because he was really a pioneer.
Yes. So he was, as you said, the first music librarian at the Library of Congress.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he certainly fostered some interest. There were some other historians. John Tasker Howard wrote a very important book in the 30s, a history of really of classical composers in the U.S. primarily. A big event happened in the 1950s. Scholar Gilbert Chase wrote a book called America's Music.
That's right.
And what was important about that book is that it brought in not just the art music tradition, but also the popular music tradition, and mixed it in and said, we have to look at all of these.
That's right.
You know, we can't just look at Charles Ives or George Chadwick or some of these composers.
Right, the New England composers.
Yeah,
or whoever.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Or even going back to William Billings, who was America's first composer.
First composer,
in the 18th century.
Absolutely.
But that was an important book. And then Wiley Hitchcock in 1969 published a book called Music in the U.S., An Introduction.
Yes.
And in that book, he put popular music and art music really on equal footing, which he was really the first person to do that. And he created this duality that's still used in American music study between what he called cultivated music and vernacular music.
Yes.
Now, we've sort of changed the terminology a little bit in the intervening years, but that idea of this kind of split, especially in the 19th century, is still there.
So interesting, yeah. So very,
but
very interesting.
It's interesting to note, though, that when he wrote that book, there really was not a sense that America's music was something worthy of serious study. So you've got to understand that these scholars were really swimming against the tide.
That's right, yeah. And one of the new gestures that I believe they were making was that there was a new approach to studying not just classical, but also popular music in its historical and social context.
Exactly.
What was the social significance? What were the circumstances? We can't even say ethnomusicology. We're talking about what was happening in the immediate surroundings, the societal surroundings that spawned or gave birth to a certain style here or something there. I mean, that could apply to anything like bands in New England, or Native American music, or jazz, or what have you.
Right.
Let's back up a little bit, though, Professor. What I'd like to know, and what I think our audience would love to know is that the first institute was what? Was it ISAM? Was it the Institute for Studies in American Music?
That's a very interesting story because when Hitchcock founded the Institute in '71, he believed it was the first of its kind. In fact, they published a flyer announcing the opening of the Institute, saying it's basically the first of its kind. And they published the very first issue of the Institute newsletter, which still exists. It's now known as the American Music Review. But it started out as just a newsletter for this institution. And they had found out in the interim between the brochure and the publication of the newsletter that they were not the first. And I just wanted to read you Wiley's very first article in the very first issue of the Institute for Studies in American Music newsletter.
And what year is
Two
this?
pages stapled together.
The whole newsletter?
1971.
1971.
November 1971.
Okay, yeah.
And he writes, our Institute for Studies in American Music was inaugurated, as such things often are, by a flyer announcing its establishment at Brooklyn College. The flyer began with this statement, quote, there exists nowhere in the USA an institution or center where scholarly studies as well as musical production are focused on American music in all of its diversity. And he talks a bit about the response to the flyer, people very excited that this was happening. But then he goes on to say, two of the responses, however, were startling. One was a letter of congratulations from Professor Jack L. Ralston of the Conservatory of Music at the University of Missouri in Kansas City, and director of its Institute for Studies in American Music.
Right.
The other was a similarly congratulatory letter from Sister Mary Dominic of the Dominican College at San Rafael, California, and head of its American Music Research Center. And what he continues on, it's classic Wiley Hitchcock, beautifully written. Those of us who knew him could imagine him saying this. Our flyer's initial statement, quote, there exists nowhere, etc., was inaccurate. We are pleased to retract it. But it was a statement made in good faith and sincere belief. That it could have been made at all suggests not that the Missouri or California centers have been inactive, or even that we at Brooklyn College are party to the fabled Eastern provinciality, but that there is a communication gap in our field. Good faith and sincere belief are not the only things needed. Better communication is too. So he was there. We were not the first. But the fact that they were unaware of these other centers really speaks to the very issue. That there was not much discussion of American music going on.
One reason why we're sitting here, Professor Taylor, is that Sister Mary Dominic Ray, who you mentioned here, who was the founder of the American Music Research Center, was my boss.
Right, I knew there was a,
she brought me into the center when I told her about my idea for this series. She said, you have a very good idea there. Come to my center, and she taught me. I was there for 2 years. It was intense. It was really intense teaching. And then she sent me to the Sonic Society meeting, 1985, where I met Professor Hitchcock. And then he became, I couldn't call him a mentor because it wasn't that serious a relationship, but he certainly was an encourager. Every time I would come to New York for my Ellington work, I'd visit the Institute. Upstairs in this building where you have your offices. And he would encourage me, he would ask questions, he would tell me what to do, and when I would see him again at any meetings of the Sonic Society, he and Professor Crawford, whose professor he was or whose advisor he was, and I understand that Professor Crawford was your advisor.
Exactly.
So here we are. You know, this is amazing.
Yeah, it's a legacy.
Yeah, it's just incredible. So this television series,
and also, as you no doubt know, the American Music Research Center still very much exists in Boulder, Colorado, and it's directed by Tom Reese.
Tom Reese, right. What I would like our audience to know, Professor Taylor, is that the Institute is going to be very, very much involved now, as the vision has been for decades in this television series. when I met you, I think you told me that Professor Hitchcock had the same idea.
That is absolutely right. In fact, that flyer that I mentioned, which was sent out when the Institute was first established,
Yeah.
actually gave a list of what Hitchcock hoped to do.
Yes.
And a lot of the things that he hoped to do did come to pass. Some of the things are not really relevant now that American music is widely accepted in the Academy.
I see. Yeah,
But
sure,
he
sure.
did mention the establishment of a television series.
Yes.
So you're kind of fulfilling his vision, and we're delighted to be a part of it.
Isn't this wonderful?
Yeah.
And I went to the Sonic Society meeting that Sister Dominic sent me to, where I met him and I met Carol Oja and Mark Tucker.
Right.
They weren't married then.
Right.
They met at that conference.
Yeah, that was a famous conference, a famous session.
Yes.
Those who attended.
Yes,
that,
and
yeah.
ladies and gentlemen, Mark Tucker is not with us anymore, but he is one of the leading scholars in Ellingtonia, the study of the music and life and work of Duke Ellington. So that's who we're talking about here. So
and he was also an important mentor and friend to me
Oh,
as
is
well.
that right? Oh.
He was on my dissertation committee,
Oh,
and so
okay.
he was very inspiring to me.
I
He
didn't
passed
know
away
that.
much too early,
he
unfortunately.
died. It was
He
so
was
sad.
in his late 40s. yeah.
Unbelievable, yeah. So now, here we are. I saw these scholars at the 1985 meeting, enriching one another, and I said to myself, why isn't their knowledge public? Why doesn't the public have the privilege of the information about American music that these scholars are discussing amongst themselves? That's why I started this project. Little did I know that Professor Hitchcock already had the idea. So here we are, and again, if you could share a little bit with our audience about the hope and the intent of your institution becoming intrinsic, more so, to the future of this project, I'd
I'll
appreciate
do that.
it.
I just wanted to mention one kind of interesting anecdote, and that when I first started going to the American Musicological Society, which is the big society that we belong to,
Yes, sir.
what I was really struck by was there was one American music session in the entire conference, and it was packed. Standing room only. I think Mark gave a talk. Tom Reese gave a talk.
Yeah, sure.
So you really got the sense of this really powerful interest in this topic that wasn't being addressed.
And what year was this now?
This would have been around 1986.
Oh, 86. Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't even aware
Yeah.
of the AMS then, American Musicological Society. I see. So again, leading into what your institution can have in terms of participation in this series, can you share anything about that?
Well,
With the vision of it, of future possibilities, or?
Yeah, obviously the Institute has been around for quite a few years
Yes,
now. And our mission has changed with the times.
Yes.
The college has always been very supportive of us, which is great.
Yeah.
But we have always been, we're not primarily an archive, although we do have some archival materials, and we have a lot of recordings and scores. But we see ourselves primarily as our mission to promote American music.
Bravo.
And all types of American
Bravo.
music.
All types.
Right.
Absolutely, yeah.
And even going, that means going beyond the United States borders,
Yes.
because like the Society for American Music, we see music of the Americas as something sort of contiguous. So.
Absolutely, sure. Now tell us about the Woody Guthrie Centennial Conference that the Institute presented.
Well, that was one of our major events in the past few years. We did it in collaboration with the Grammy Museum out in LA.
In LA, yeah.
And Bob Santelli, who's there. And we had a day-long conference of talk or papers about Woody Guthrie, and then we had a panel discussion with Woody Guthrie's daughter Nora, Judy Collins, the singer, songwriter,
Absolutely,
of course, you know. And then in the evening, the Grammy Museum presented this wonderful concert with all these lovers of Guthrie, people who were strongly influenced by Woody Guthrie, people who knew him. So it was a fantastic concert. Judy Collins was there, Billy Bragg, a great folk protest singer.
Mm-hmm.
Arlo Guthrie, who many people know was Woody Guthrie's son, and is famous for Alice's Restaurant, the movie.
Absolutely.
Was actually with his wife, who was very sick at the time, so he couldn't make it.
Right.
So we had to get a ringer, and guess who we got?
Pete Seeger.
Pete Seeger.
Yeah.
Exactly. He came down. He was quite frail at the time, but he came down and
this is amazing.
he joined us on stage, and he came out. There was an amazing standing ovation.
Yeah.
And I remember Pete Seeger saying, "Well, that's all very nice, but what I really want you to do is to sing."
Yeah.
And then he got everybody to sing along with him, which of course was his thing.
Yeah.
But we had actually given a conference a few years earlier on Ruth Crawford Seeger, who was a very important composer, fortunately better known now than she used to be. But we had all of her sort of extended family. We had Mike Seeger, we had Peggy Seeger, we had Pete Seeger. They all came out for this, and it was a wonderful event. So we've had some great connections with the Seegers and with the Woody Guthrie people and their archive. It's been really a phenomenal experience.
And this is all presented by the Hitchcock, or the H. Wiley Hitchcock Institute.
Yeah, in collaboration with others.
With others, for studies in American music. One final question. I am very interested in your own work, your own research and performance, relating to the great jazz musician, big band era leader, the wonderful Earl Father Hines. Can you tell us a bit about that for the end of the program?
I'd be happy to. As I told you, I could talk about Hines for hours.
Yeah.
But he's somebody, he really should be a household name on the order of Monk or Ellington or Armstrong.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, he's not, and there are a variety of reasons, I think, for that. But he was one of the most important sort of foundational figures in the history of jazz piano.
Yes.
And he also led a very important band in the 40s in Chicago.
It's a big band.
Right, a big band.
A big band.
A big band called the Grand Terrace Orchestra.
Right, at the Grand Terrace Hotel.
Yeah. And it's interesting because at that time, most jazz activity had really moved to New York, but he stayed in Chicago, and he built up his band there too. So he is really a remarkable pianist, had a long career. He was 79, I believe, when he passed away in 1983, and he was playing up until the weekend before he died.
My goodness, yeah.
And he was one of the strongest players of jazz over here. Incredible power in his playing, and an incredible sense of time.
Yes,
he could do things with time, manipulating time, making you think that he lost his place or lost the beat. Yeah, things like that. He loved to do that.
Yeah, and recover it.
Exactly.
And have your head swimming.
Yeah, so he's definitely he's somebody I think people should really know better.
Absolutely, influencing the likes of Art Tatum and the greatest.
Teddy Wilson, Billy Kyle.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, we're going to close our program today with a beautiful piano solo, Stanley's Dance. Well, Professor Jeffrey Taylor and my friend, thank you so very much. We're
My
very,
pleasure.
Yes, and we're excited that you, as the director of the H. Wiley Hitchcock Institute for Studies in American Music.
We call it the Hitchcock Institute.
We call it the Hitchcock Institute. Hi, Sam. In
Hi,
other words.
Sam, yeah.
All
I
of-
tried to get people to, because Wiley hated when people called it I, Sam.
Hi, Sam. Okay.
So Hi, Sam is even worse.
It's
I
even
think.
worse. Okay, so the Hitchcock Institute.
Yeah.
This is at the Conservatory of Music at Brooklyn College in New York. And ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you very much for joining us on American Music. We have been honored to have as our guest Dr. Jeffrey Taylor, the director of the Institute for the Hitchcock Institute for Studies in American Music
Yeah.
at Brooklyn College, and we hope that you will join us again. We live our stories through public television. Be with us again. Thank you.